The International Court of Justice has entered its second day of hearings focused on Israel's legal obligations to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Earlier today, South Africa's representative addressed the court, stating that under the world's watchful eye, Palestinians are being subjected to atrocities, persecution, apartheid, and genocide. In a separate development, newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney led the Liberal Party to a narrow victory, securing a fourth consecutive term. The result grants Carney a renewed mandate to safeguard Canada's sovereignty while addressing key issues in trade and the economy. I'm Hala Al-Hamalawi. Let's get in focus. As public hearings continue at the International Court of Justice, South Africa has intensified its legal and diplomatic campaign, accusing Israel of violating international law through its occupation and military actions in Gaza and the West Bank. According to the Africa Report, Zane Denger, South Africa's Director General for International Relations, painted a stark picture of life for Palestinians during his remarks in The Hague, citing UN reports that describe Gaza as a killing field and warning of a man-made famine. This intervention is part of a broader legal effort launched by South Africa in December 2023 when it filed a complaint at the ICJ saying that Israel had committed acts of genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Additionally, the ICJ hearings take place amid mounting global scrutiny of Israel's actions in Gaza and worsening famine conditions. Saudi Arabia's representative Mohammed Saud al-Nasser strongly condemned Israel's actions in Gaza and the occupied Palestinian territories during a statement at the International Court of Justice. Al-Nasser accused Israel of flagrant violations of international law in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, highlighting the country's continued settlement activities, occupation, and annexation of Palestinian land. He noted that less than a year ago, the ICJ had already addressed these violations, urging Israel to cease its illegal actions. Despite this, Israel had ignored the court's ruling, displaying an attitude of impunity, according to Abdel Nasser, who also criticized Israel for obstructing international humanitarian efforts, stressing that allowing UN and other international organizations to provide aid in the occupied territories could save countless lives. The Jerusalem Governor's Office has condemned the closure of the Jerusalem Fund and Endowment in occupied East Jerusalem, ordered by Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. The Israeli move is seen as part of a systematic policy by the occupation aimed at undermining the Palestinian presence in occupied Jerusalem. The Jerusalem Fund and Endowment, established in 2014 as a non-profit independent initiative by Palestinian residents of East Jerusalem, is focused solely on social, humanitarian, and charitable work, with no involvement in political activities. Its mission is to support local communities and strengthen their resilience under occupation. Head of Israel's Domestic Intelligence Service has announced his resignation, saying that he would step down on June 15th, 6 weeks after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tried to oust him. The Israeli Prime Minister's decision to sack Barr in March sparked protests nationwide, with critics arguing that the government was undermining key state institutions and endangering the foundations of Israeli democracy. Bar, who had been one of the main Israeli negotiators in ceasefire and detainees release talks, had already indicated that he would resign before his term was due to end in about 18 months, accepting responsibility for Shin Bet's failure to forestall the attack.
ערכיו של השירות נגזרים מתוך ערכיה של מדינת ישראל כמדינה יהודית ודמוקרטית, והם יושרה, ממלכתיות, רעות, תעוזה, ריסון הכוח, הטלת ספק, שמירת הסוד. עלינו לשמור 5 שנות שירות בכדי לאפשר תהליך סדור.
Delving more into this, joins us from Cairo, Mr. Ashraf Al-Ashri, Al-Ahram newspaper managing editor. Thank you very much for being with us here. Now, sir, how do you view South Africa's recent statements before the ICJ's case, and what impact do you think that it might have on international legal norms and accountability for Israel?
Greetings to you and your audience. Certainly, South Africa's statement that has a very positive role, either in before the claims in the ICC and the ITC that condemned Netanyahu, along with his military chiefs. Criminalizing and condemning Israel currently for having an urgent international resolution to halt the Israeli aggression of Gaza Strip, either by killing and massacring in Palestine, and to escalate the opening the crossing to deliver the humanitarian aids as well as the food aids as soon as possible, and for refraining the aids for more than 60 days, alongside with the brutal actions by the Israeli forces. Therefore, the Arab and Islamic nations and their submission before the ICJ throughout the 5 days that include condemnation to Israel, and we hope the US not to disrupt the rule of the court to be documented by criminalizing Israel, which is expected and would expose the role of Trump that is playing a negative role with this regard. That make it very difficult to move forward throughout a peace in the region.
Since it's not the first case that South Africa files against Israel, do you believe that this ICJ case could actually shift how the international community enforces international law regarding Israel's occupation and military aggression in Gaza?
What has been submitted by several countries, along with South Africa, in testimonies and within the Gaza Strip, that expose the brutalities of the Israelis' actions into destruction and starvation, along with the genocidal war. And maybe in the final recommendations would have some sort of a resolution or consultation to be presented before the UN Security Council to implement its resolutions by force. Certainly, South Africa has a great stance with the cooperation with the Arab countries, but this would require to pressure in the upcoming period as a situation in Gaza as very drastic and miserable. And in the meantime, a comprehensive starvation war has taken place that would affect all the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and this should stop. And the resolution of the ICG would endorse the condemnation fully in Israel, along with the international testimony that condemned Israel and its deeds and actions in the Gaza Strip.
Mm-hmm. With famine worsening in Gaza, what immediate actions are needed from the international community beyond statements of condemnation?
I think the matter would need a resolution by the international community to pressure Israel to open the crossings. Even Israel's friends in the West, France, Italy, and Germany, their foreign minister issued their statement in the past week requesting Israel to stop the aggression and demanded without any stallment to facilitate the delivery of the humanitarian aid. So there are only two options: either U.S. to pressure Israel within the upcoming hours, following the negotiation taking place in Cairo between Hamas and Israel of the possibility to resume the negotiation and deliver the aid, or to resort to the UN Security Council to issue an urgent resolution with this regard and give the priority of any other bending issue with regard to the life of the Palestinian people, that they are most precious than the manipulation or maneuvering by the Israelis. Mm-hmm. And also to prevent some sort of these actions against 2.4 million citizens in Palestine.
Okay, so how do you perceive the latest statements of the Palestinian representative to the Security Council calling on all countries to support the nation's right to self-determination?
Palestine's representatives in the United Nations expresses the magnitude of the disaster that the Palestinian people is facing, particularly what has been taken by the Israeli brutal deeds affecting the shelter of those being displaced. And the process of demolishing their homes and using killing and starvation to force them to be displaced represents the most horrible apartheid crimes by Israel in this time. And also there is an American reluctance, and hence the representative resorted to the international community represented by the United Nations to expose these horrible and appalling crimes. And there are tens of thousands still under the rebels and more than 150,000 injured people. So when the Palestinian representative cried, and in a sense, or rather is targeting the humanitarian sense in the international community, to reject the Jewish plan of Judaiization of the Palestinian territories. And even Netanyahu talks that he's actually revealed his intention to sustain the war despite all of that.
So how is the targeting the ICJ's hearings on Gaza are set to continue for a week. What kind of accountability or international pressure do you believe is necessary to stop further civilian harm?
I think before the exposure and the criminalization, exposing the Israeli practices, Israel had resorted to hide and to run a way forward and rejected to be present before the ICJ and even to have a symbolic representative. So I think this is coming from its weakened stance, and as you know, that all the international organizations condemning Israel and presented the proofs of these crimes by Israel. I think at the end of the hearing, within 3 to 4 days, and the court will issue a resolution to be sent to the UN Security Council, and it will be an opportunity to condemn Israel, and then will have some sort of possibility to criminalize it as the ICC resolution is abiding but should be implemented through the UN Security Council.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was Mr. Ashraf El-Arshi, Al-Ahram newspaper managing editor. Thank you so much for your insights. And now let's move to the recent developments in Canada. At the beginning of the year, Canada's Conservatives held a commanding lead, and their leader, Pierre Poilievre, looked certain to be the country's next prime minister. However, the Liberals, now led by Mark Carney, have won the election, though likely forming another minority government. According to The Guardian, this marks a significant political turnaround and affirms Carney's strategy of presenting himself as the prime ministerial candidate who would most effectively stand up to Donald Trump. Known for his technocratic background, including leading the Bank of England, Carney plans to focus on internal economic reforms and investment, while cautiously approaching U.S. trade negotiations and strengthening ties with the UK and Europe. And for more analysis, we're joined by Dr. Kamala Zarkta, Professor of EU Law and Security Studies in Brussels. Welcome. And we want to know from you, how do you view newly elected Prime Minister Mark Carney's leadership in guiding the Liberal Party to narrow victory in Canada's pivotal election?
Well, we have to start with the fact that Mark Carney's leadership during the election demonstrated extraordinary resilience and strategic clarity, that's for sure. Because despite of entering to political arena just before the campaign, he successfully united a very fragmented Liberal Party and presented a credible alternative to aggressive external environment, particularly, well, let's be honest, U.S. administration under Donald Trump. Carney's technocratic background restores centrist and moderate voters craving stability. That's really important, because by framing the election to a defense of Canada's sovereignty and independence, he was able to galvanize national sentiment, and that's really important. And I think there's actually, well, that's the reason why he won. However, sustaining unity with the Liberal Party, which includes both progressive and centrist faction, will be a challenge. His lack of traditional political experience could expose vulnerabilities into day-to-day governance and parliamentary negotiation, as well as the day-to-day running of the government of Canada. Nevertheless, his international credibility and firm leadership style will offer Canada a steady hand in the year of growing geopolitical uncertainty. He will be definitely a different leader.
Okay. As Canada enters a new era under the Liberals' leader, Mark Carney, what kind of future do Canadians envision? And how can Carney embody that vision?
Well, clearly, Canadians envision a future that reaffirms country sovereignty, strengthens alliance beyond North America, and ensures economical stability, especially for the middle class. They seek a Canada that is innovative, sustainable, socially inclusive, and resilient against external economic shock. Carney is well positioned to embody this. I think that's his technocratic competence suggests quite a pragmatic approach to economical modernization, while his international stature can help Canada forge stronger global alliance, particularly with Europe and with NATO. Well, surely challenges will arise, but from balancing quite nationalistic aspiration with economic reality of US interdependence, addressing deepening regional disparities within Canada, managing public expectation for swift and social reform, I think the success, which might be a part of Carney's achievement, will depend on his ability to stay grounded in economic realism while faring really forward-looking and inclusive narrative for all Canadians to actually unite Canadians as a united Liberal Party, basically.
In your opinion, Ms. Kamala, how might Carney's background as a central banker shape Canada's domestic and international economic policies in the years ahead?
Well, I hope you don't mind that I will use my skills as a behavior profiler just a little tiny bit. But I would like to just emphasize that his background is quietly, let's say, is actually giving us an impression that his background is as short as a disciplined, analytical approach to economic policymaker. And this is the reason why those skills will be very quickly transferred to the policy making, but as well to the government seat, because he would likely prioritize fiscal prudence, ensuring that the social spending programs are tied to stable political finance. He will, in my opinion, remain quite vigilant on inflation control, subjugating Canadian purchasing power amid global uncertainties. And this is something which we have in really in the numbers. Internationally, Carney's deep knowledge on financial system position is giving him a champion trade diversification and greater financial integration with Europe and other democratic countries. And his experience leading both Bank of Canada and Bank of England during crises make him uniquely equipped to manage economic shocks. That's the reason why, from those very, let's say, hard skills, I believe that if he will face challenges in navigating inflation risk without inducing a slowdown, balancing global financial exposure with domestic stability, he will take a proactive action to implement structural reforms and might counter resistance to traditional industries. But I think he will manage to convince the Canadians that this is unfortunately not easy way, but good way.
Could be this one of the challenges? I mean, we're talking about the challenges facing him. What challenges and opportunities at the same time could emerge from Carney's plan to strengthen trade ties with the UK and Europe instead of relying primarily on the United States?
Well, yes, you absolutely agree. This is one of them. Then the strategic pivot towards UK and Europe offers Canada greater economic sovereignty and resilience, as well as greater involvement within the commerce and economic relation with the EU, but as well strengthened in position with NATO. By deepening trade ties with democratic partners from Europe, Carney can shield Canada from unpredictable issues that might arise from US policy shifts. And by this, he can foster innovation in key sectors like green energy and technology, as well, let's say, start a new path of innovation and research collaboration between EU and Canada. Moreover, the major change may loom, but regulatory hurdles in Europe could impose significant compliance costs for Canadian business. We have to take into account. The trade volumes with Europe are still modest compared to North America, meaning that will sustain effort to being meaningful alternatives. The private risk revoking retaliatory measures from US, especially under the populist Trump administration might happen as well. But Carney's success, he will depend on his skillful diplomacy.
Of course.
He needs to offer Canada a bridge.
Yes, of
and
course.
Canada to be a bridge between Europe and the North America.
Well, that was Dr. Kamila Zarikta-Romanovska, Professor of EU Law and Security Studies in Brussels. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Focus. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News. Until next time.